Hello and welcome to AgriCulture Live. My name's Rebecca Shields. I'm from Agricultural Recruitment Specialists, and today joining me we've got Owen Atkinson. He's an owner and director at Dairy Veterinary Consultancy Limited. He's also a Nuffield Scholar, a cow signals trainer, and an RCVS specialist dairy vet. It's all a mouthful there, isn't it, Owen?
Yeah, morning, Rebecca. I thought you were on your way to calling me an arse, but no, it's thankfully changed to RCVS.
Oh, so today we're going to be talking about cows ruining the planet. So some people might have comments or questions. Please feel free to post them up if you do, and we'll get to them. And so it's over to you, Owen. So introduce yourself, where you work, what your company does.
Yeah, thanks, Rebecca. So I'm Owen Atkinson. I am a vet. My company is Dairy Veterinary Consultancy, which is it is what it says on the tin. I was a vet in practice, as you might imagine. Most vets work for 20 years in mainly farm practice, and latterly in a large dairy-based practice in Cheshire, which is where I still live and work. And then in 2013, I left practice and made the unusual step of starting a consultancy business, which is sort of taking veterinary into a different direction, really. And my work now is working with dairy farmers, of course, other dairy vets. I do a lot of training for vets and second opinion work for other vets. But within the wider industry, really. So within the wider dairy industry, I do a lot of work with processors, a little bit with pharmaceutical companies, etc.
Excellent. And so what makes you guys stand out from your competitors?
So my role is quite different to most vets. I don't do clinical work anymore, which means I don't put my hand at the backside of cows, and I don't sell medicines, and I don't use a stethoscope. So I'm not sort of dealing with sick animals. I am all about prevention rather than treatment. I have worked hard over my career to build up my expertise and specialism. As you say, I'm an RCVS specialist, which is that term specialist is a protected term for vets. You know, you can't just call yourself a specialist just because you fancy doing that. You have to have the permission from the Royal College. And in order to do that, I have taken lots of extra exams, and I have to renew that specialist status every 5 years by demonstrating extra competence and skills in my area. The specialism area is cattle health and production.
Fantastic. So how did you get into this field and why?
So, I mean, going back a bit, I was a schoolboy, and I kind of quite liked science, and I guess I thought I was going to be a doctor, I think, because I thought, I like biology. But I was from a farm as well, and it was fairly natural. I think it was probably more obvious to other people than it was to me to become a vet. And when I became a vet, I was always interested in doing the farm animal stuff. I guess because I'm from a farm, or my dad, my granddad had a farm. So that's really how I got into being a farm animal vet. And then my career progressed. Like a lot of vets, you're out in practice and you do get a bit frustrated. I think this is something that I suffered from, but I know it's common amongst other vets as well, farm vets, is that you do spend a lot of time treating sick animals, and yet what we really want to do, and what we're probably better at, is preventing disease in the first place. It's particularly for your farm vet. That tends to be what draws you into being a farm vet, is that prevention piece and working with people and being, I guess, having that wider overview. If you're interested in treating sick animals, you become a horse or a pet, or cat and dog vet, really, because that's what you do.
Well,
I wasn't so interested in that. I was
better than cure, isn't it, Owen?
Well, yeah, yes, it is, and of course we all say that, and it is true. It's complicated. I know you want to talk a little bit about the wider aspect of agriculture and ruminant farming, and in terms of the impact on global warming and the planet. And I think a lot of farm vets have that very kind of global view of the work they do. They see the animal health work they do in that wider context of One Health, if you like. But farming animals is so intrinsically involved with human health as well, because of nutrition, and of course global health because of potential global warming and care of our environment. But yeah, I guess all that came to a head, and what stimulated me to leave practice and set up my consultancy business to allow me purely and solely to concentrate on that wider stuff, rather than be, I'm going to use the word dragged in, but it makes it sound very, very negative, but dragged into treating the sick animals, because of course that's what the demand is from farmers. Farmers ring the vet to usually go out and treat something that is sick. And I wanted to remove myself from that situation, really. I wanted to set my stall out in a different way.
Fair enough. So you're a Nuffield Scholar, which is fantastic. So can you tell people watching and listening what one of those are?
Yes. So the Nuffield Farming Travel Scholarship scheme, it's overseen by the Nuffield Farming Trust. It is a fantastic opportunity if you're involved in agriculture at all. So this is for farmers, but also for people who are like myself, sort of involved as a support industry, are eligible to apply for a Nuffield Travel Scholarship. And the key word is to travel. You have to travel, which is no hardship if you enjoy traveling like myself. But you apply with a subject that you're interested in investigating further, and it could be anything. If you're a potato grower, it might be how to grow potatoes better. For me, as a farm vet, it was how we as farm vets could become better communicators with our clients, and particularly with dairy clients, and involved really with how do we encourage farmers to embrace change? How do we encourage them to make changes? And that was my Nuffield Travel Scholarship. That was in 2009 and 2010.
Fantastic. Interesting subject. Did you learn a lot?
Well, not as much as you kind of like, in the sense that, yes, I did, and it was fantastic, but there's no clear answer in these things. I went with my question, which is how, as a vet, could I be better at helping farmers make changes? And wherever I went, it was like, well, yeah, and when you find out the answer, come back and tell us, because we don't know either. But that was encouraging in a way, because it was a common problem. It was a common problem that a lot of vets have all around the world. So I was going to, I went to America, I went to New Zealand, and I went to the Netherlands. They were my three key kind of countries I traveled to. Where I learned a lot, Rebecca, actually, was from the developing countries, because, and not necessarily in the vet field, there's been a lot of work. AIDS was probably the AIDS epidemic back in the 1980s was one of the things that really pushed on development agencies to work in changing behaviour, and in Africa in particular. And the key elements were really something called participatory learning, or participatory epidemiology, which is helping people sort of take ownership of the problem themselves. And I learned a lot from their learnings, if that makes sense. So in other words, as adults, we learn from each other, and we no one wants to be told what to do, but you just have to discover it for yourself.
We have got a lot of lessons that we can learn from the developing countries, definitely. I've had other people on the show that have said that. But today we're going to talk about our cows ruining the planet. So
yes.
Tell us, Owen, tell us about your passion for cows. I can see your picture in the background.
Yes.
Where did this passion come from?
Oh gosh, anyone who works with cows, I think, probably has a passion for them. They are wonderful animals. They truly are. They are wonderful because they're large, and yet they're usually relatively gentle. The ones we work with are usually very gentle, and that stems because they're a domesticated animal that have changed over hundreds of thousands of years. People sometimes talk of cows as being the mother of civilization. And I don't know whether, Rebecca, whether you've heard that expression, have you?
I haven't actually. Tell us about that.
So it sort of stems from the fact that, you know, we as human beings now in this modern world, we live in societies, and some of us live in cities, etc., and countries, and all that, you could argue, stems from our ability as human beings to transition from hunter-gatherers to farmers. And cows were one of the first animals that human beings domesticated and farmed. And the reason why cows are so valuable is because they produce that bit of protein every day in their milk. So it's different to just eating their meat. It's living coexisting with cows, and getting nutrition from their milk, basically. And that, according to some, allowed civilization to develop. And I
Right.
think that kind of, you know, cows are in our genes, in essence, because human beings have co-evolved with our domesticated cattle. And I find that absolutely fascinating. In our country, in the UK, most people in our society are quite divorced from cows. You know, they don't see cows and work with cows. They're not lucky enough. But you haven't got to go back too many years, really, before that wasn't the case. You know, when if you didn't own a cow yourself, you'd probably know someone who did. And that's still true when you go to developing countries, and it's still true when, well, even in places like New Zealand and Ireland, most people are from a farm, or their grandparents are from a farm, or their parents are from a farm. So they have a closer connection to farming and to nature and to cows than perhaps most people do in Britain at the moment.
Wow, it is really fascinating, Owen. So do you think the agricultural industry gets all the bad rap in terms of climate change?
Well, they don't get all the bad rap, but we get a lot. And sometimes you've got to wonder where that comes from. So I'm quite cynical sometimes about where we're getting our messages from. And I'm going to use a classic, you know, Oatly oat milk, where they have invested probably millions of pounds in an advertising campaign to get us to drink oat milk. And they do it by almost guilt tripping us into thinking that if we're drinking dairy cow milk, that we're ruining the planet. And yet the message is very warped, and it's to sell oat milk. That's all it is. It's to sell oat milk. It's not to save the planet. And unfortunately, that's where a lot of the anti-dairy messages come from. I mean, some of the anti-dairy messages come from other areas as well. Now, that's not to deny any ownership of the responsibility of dairy farmers, in particular dairy farmers, that's the sector I work in, any ownership of responsibility for climate change. But I think to understand the bigger picture is really important, but it's a complex picture. So it's not easy to grasp straight away. I'm happy to explain it a little bit to you, Rebecca, if you'd like.
Because
if you'd like me to.
There's a lot of talk about methane from cows.
Yeah.
You know, one of my aunties was like, "Oh, you can't, you know, I've gone vegetarian because, you know, of the climate change that cows cause." You know, because that is the message that we get everywhere. You know, explain it to us. You know, are cows a major environmental problem?
Okay. So I'm going to start with the biology, really, of where methane comes from in a cow. So cows are, and I'm fascinated with the biology of cows' digestion because I guess it's what I do. I'm a vet. But it is absolutely fascinating how cows can, and other ruminants, so sheep as well, but we'll talk about cows. They can use grass and forage to feed themselves, and we can't. You know, as human beings, we can't. Pigs can't, chickens can't, cows can. Horses can as well, but we'll just stick with, they don't get the same bad rap. And the reason they do it is because of the rumen. And in the rumen, which is about a third of a cow, is the rumen. You know, if you're going to look inside a cow, it's huge. The rumen is what fills its belly, and that's a big fermentation vat. And it's the bugs in the rumen that break down the foragers. And there's a whole plethora of bugs. I mean, there are hundreds and millions and billions of these bacteria primarily, but also yeasts and protozoa. And there are some which are called archaea. Now, archaea they're not a bacteria. They're kind of they're a more primordial organism than bacteria. They were one of the first one of the first organisms that grew on planet Earth, archaea. And they're very, very simple organisms, and they can survive on very, very little. And what they live on is hydrogen ions. And they, if you like, because it's an ecosystem, that fermentation vat in the rumen is an ecosystem. And they all depend on each other. But basically what they do is they break down grass, forage, which is cellulose, which like I say, human beings can't access that as a nutrient. And they create nutrients for the cow. So basically the cow lives on the nutrients that these bacteria and archaea and yeast and fungi produce in the rumen. The cow is living on a bacterial soup, or a microbial soup, if you like, which sort of is a result of this fermentation process. And that's what makes cows very special. They can turn food, they can turn forage into food, which other animals can't do, and human beings can use that food, whether it be milk or whether it be meat. Now, the archaea are the ones that produce the methane, and they do it because they mop up some hydrogen ions, which is hydrogen ions are part of acid, if you know that, and they're quite important because they keep that balance right. It's all to do with the balance. It's like, I guess, if you think about other ecosystems, the tropical rainforest, if you remove one part of the ecosystem, it affects everything else. And if you remove the archaea from rumens, it would affect everything else. It would affect the efficiency and the function of that whole ecosystem. So these are the archaea, these little things that are smaller than bacteria, and they produce methane, and they do it because they're part of that ecosystem. And they've always done it. They've been around for as long as cows have been around for. Now, the methane they produce is a byproduct of this fermentation, and methane is a greenhouse gas. It does have a global warming effect. Now, I think it's important just to get it into context, though. So methane, as a global warming gas, is probably accounts for 5 to 10% of global warming. The vast majority is nitrous oxide, and carbon dioxide is the big one, but also water vapor. Water vapor causes global warming. So methane does have a global warming effect. Now, on a pound for pound basis, methane is quite a strong global warmer. So if you kind of take a pound in weight of carbon dioxide and a pound in weight of methane, then methane is stronger. But still, nevertheless, even accounting for that, because carbon dioxide and water vapor and nitrous oxide are produced in bigger quantities, methane still only accounts for 5 to 10% of global warming. Now, the methane that accounts for this 5 to 10% global warming, about a quarter of it comes from rumen fermentation. It comes from cattle and sheep. So that sets it in context. It's a quarter of, let's say, 5 or 10%. So if we went for 10%, a quarter of 10% is 2.5%. So 2.5% at most of global warming comes from cattle.
Wow. And it's painted as like, so much more than that, isn't it?
And it's more complex than that. So the thing is about methane as a global warming gas is it has a 10-year life cycle. So it breaks down after 10 years. Carbon dioxide takes hundreds of years to break down.
Okay.
So if the cattle population stays the same, then it's just a balance. So cows are producing methane, but at the same rate they're producing it, it's breaking down. It is true that if we increased our cattle population or our sheep population or any of the ruminants, then the amount of methane, the net production of methane would increase. But at the moment, our world cattle population is relatively stable. But it is something to consider. As human beings increase in number, they tend to want more protein, and therefore, if we increase our cattle population, it's not happening in Britain, but it might globally, then there would be more methane produced from cattle. But still keep it in context. It is a drop in the ocean compared to the amount of methane that is produced elsewhere. So 25% is from cattle. The amount of methane is produced elsewhere. Well, a lot of it, about a third of methane that is produced, is from fossil fuels in just the because that's released when you mine fossil fuels, not when you're burning it, but when you're mining it. So that produces more methane. But about half of it, so the rest of it, the vast majority of methane, actually comes from the oceans and from soil. Now, no one's saying that we should banish the oceans and banish soil, because it's part of this natural cycle. The great thing about oceans and soil is that they are carbon sinks. So if it's healthy, so healthy oceans and healthy soil, they take carbon dioxide and they hold it there. So if you, I'll explain kind of how that works. I'm more confident about talking about this in the soil rather than I am the oceans. But in soil, if you've got permanent pasture or tropical rainforest, so I'm talking about vegetation that's permanent, not cropping. I'm not talking about wheat fields, maize fields, soya fields, all the things that people want us to do instead of keeping cows. I'm talking about permanent pasture and permanent vegetation such as rainforests. What they do, that those plants, they use carbon dioxide. I think everyone knows that, don't they? Photosynthesis. They take up carbon dioxide and they turn it into sugars and building blocks for their own life. That carbon dioxide, or that carbon, if you like, as the vegetation gets recycled into the soil, is held in the soil. And eventually, after millions of years, it would become oil or coal. Yeah, so it's a sink. It's a carbon sink. Now, if we look at cattle farming within that context, if it is done with permanent pasture, so pasture-based cattle farming, it has a net global warming benefit, because the amount of carbon dioxide that is taken up by those permanent pastures more than outweighs the methane, which in any case is recycled and breaks down after 10 years. So it has a net cooling effect on the planet. So it's a good thing.
Yeah. But that's not how the picture's painted, is it, Owen?
And it's complicated. You need to dig into it to find the truth out. Now, it is true that, we could do better with dairy farming than, we like I say, I'm not absolving all responsibility, because methane is a strong global warming gas. If we can reduce the amount of methane that we produce, then that's great. So therefore, if we can farm our cattle more efficiently, then that is great. If we can use more regenerative pastures whilst we do our farming, that is great. So that's more, the carbon dioxide, the methane, which is produced from a cow that is grazing pasture or using forages in silage, is better for the planet than, let's say, the cow that is fed a high soya and maize diet, because growing the soya and the maize, because it's cropping, which is again what people want us to, they want us to eat the soya and the maize ourselves and be vegetarians, but actually that cropping doesn't have that net global cooling benefit of locking up carbon in the soils. Wow. So it's, it is complicated to think, well, how can keeping our cattle be done in a more regenerative way, the most regenerative way possible?
So how can we change this message then?
Well, it's kind of you to give me the opportunity of having a little part of that this morning, I guess.
Yeah.
Those of us that are in the industry, we need to upskill ourselves and learn what is happening. We need to be open to suggestions and have our ears open to wider society. There's no point of just going into this blinkered and just in denial that cattle and methane production doesn't have any role at all in global warming. I don't think that's very helpful. How do we do it, Rebecca? I don't know. I don't know, in honesty, because we haven't got millions of pounds worth of advertising money to let's say, like Oatly, and I'm going to name Oatly because everyone knows it because of their millions of pounds of advertising. That to put out this simple, what is a very simple but wrong message, that drinking milk is warming the planet and killing us all off. if only we did have that advertising clout to put out a simple message to say, no, cows save the planet. I
Wow.
don't know how we do it. I don't know how we do it.
So what would you say to people that ask, do we need to give up consuming meat?
Do we need to give up consuming meat? So we need to be less wasteful with all of our resources, I believe.
Yeah.
If you want to give up meat, that's fine. I mean, it is everyone's prerogative to not eat meat or be a vegan. That's fine. I think to do so because in the belief that you're doing it to save the planet, I think isn't correct. I think that would be disingenuous to believe that, unless you intend to stop eating all food.
Yes.
If you intend to not eat anything, but switching dairy for let's say tofu isn't necessarily going to save the planet, because the production of the tofu, which is cropping, is likely to, or tofu is likely, that in itself has got a global impact. So as consumers, we can be less wasteful. Probably all of us could eat a little bit less of everything.
Yeah.
And be less wasteful. And arguably being more careful about our protein. We overconsume in protein in the West, we do. So we don't need to eat as much meat as we do. So that's a fair point. I think.
But then there's a lot of these protein diets that are, marketed, aren't there, as well?
Yes. I mean, I've got two boys, old boys. Older boys. They're sort of early 20s, both of them, and they like to have their protein shakes and that kind of thing to help them build muscle, which will be largely dairy derived, because I think they're whey based usually. Yes, whether they need as much protein, I don't know. But I think let's not ignore the obvious. 5 or 10% of global warming comes from methane. About 25% of that methane is from cattle. So in other words, 2.5% of our global warming effect comes from cattle. Where is the other 97.5% coming from? It is coming from fossil fuels.
Yes. Yeah.
And I know it's hard. I like traveling abroad and going on aeroplanes, and I like to live in a house that is centrally heated, etc. But if I want to have an impact on global warming, it's there that I need to concentrate, really, Rebecca.
Thank you, Owen. That's so interesting. So what are your thoughts on lab-grown meat? Because that's making a big waves in the news at the minute.
Yeah, and I'm not an expert in this area, so I don't know a lot about it. I've come across it probably like you have, Rebecca, just by reading what I've read, and from my understanding is that that there's been a lot of money put into it, because as a concept it's quite interesting, but it's a very expensive thing to produce. So I'm not sure whether it'll actually get there.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not against farming animals, but I am very pro animal welfare, and those two things are not that one doesn't mean that you can't have the other.
Absolutely.
You can farm animals and you can have good animal welfare. I know that because I work with cows, but I work tirelessly to improve animal welfare, because we can do better. We can do better. We've co-evolved with cows for hundreds and hundreds of thousands of years, and we owe them everything. We can continue to live with cows, farming them for hopefully hundreds of thousands of years more, but to do so in a responsible, humane and caring way.
So how can the lives of cows be improved, Owen?
Gosh, more space for a lot of cows. Cows do like space, and it's a little bugbear of mine is when I see cows with restricted space. So if I see dairy farmers and they have fewer cubicles, for example, than they have cows, cubicles being the beds, then that gets me quite cross. That'd be one example. Lameness is another area where we just need to keep paying attention on how we can improve foot health all the time. In our dairy herds, I work tirelessly to improve lameness. Some of that will be through genetic improvements, but a lot of it is through improving the environment. of the cows, better housing.
Mm.
Personally, I do like to see cows outside on pasture for the reasons I've said. That's not to say that all farms need to have all cows outside all the time. But if they're on forage-based diets, then that is a good thing for the environment. But generally speaking, good things for cow. That's a good thing for the cows' welfare and health too. So there's a few examples of how you might improve the lives of cows. Treat
Thanks,
them
Owen.
with the respect they deserve.
Definitely, and you've made some great points there. So you're probably aware a major issue for agriculture is actually attracting new entrants to the industry. We've got aging farming population.
Yeah.
How would you, what's your input on this? How do we do this?
Yeah, I mean, farming is an incredibly exciting industry to be in, and I don't think it's always been viewed like that in my lifetime. Perhaps there was a time when if you were a dairy farmer, you were in this country, it was just because you were expected to be, because your dad was a dairy farmer and probably your granddad was a dairy farmer, and it's just your turn. It needs to be a lifestyle choice, and it can be a lifestyle choice. And I think there's better opportunities for new entrants into dairy in this country, emulating what happens in New Zealand, really, where if you're a dairy farmer, it's because you've chosen to be a dairy farmer. And it's a very good choice to be a dairy farmer because you're working with cows, which is an honor. You're working outside, which is a pleasure. Every day is different. You are using your brain all the time. It's an incredibly practical job, and it should, if it's done well, be financially rewarding, so you can have a really good lifestyle as well. So we need to speak it up. We need to talk it up. Being a farmer should be a choice, and it's a good choice. Unfortunately, in this country, farmers get a bad rap. And you go abroad, it doesn't need to be to New Zealand. If you go to the Netherlands, you walk off the aeroplane, and what do you see? You see pictures of windmills, tulips, and dairy cows. And they've got pride in their dairy farmers and their agriculture. And I just wish some of that pride existed in Britain a little bit more, because it's sometimes a little bit depressing to feel like you're the enemy of the state as a farmer in Great Britain. And I think that's sad.
We could do with some money from the government to really push our industry forward, couldn't we?
Yeah, money, but just having pride in farming and farmers. Just the right attitude and words, rather than necessarily, like I say, just talking the industry down. And
I
this
think
blame for global warming, it feeds into that. It's really sad.
But then you look at little kids and, even my daughter on the weekend said to me that she wanted to be a farmer when she grew up, which I thought
Lovely.
was quite lovely, and some of her friends are boys the same. So hopefully there's change coming.
Well, we need to nurture that, and we need to make better opportunities for people to get into farming.
Absolutely, because not all of us are from farm backgrounds, are we?
No. And I don't know a quick answer to that, Rebecca. I do see more new entrants into dairy farming because perhaps farmers who are retiring may retain the land and become landlords and landowners. And this is the New Zealand model where you don't necessarily need to be the landowner to be a farmer, and you can start by buying a few cows and being a share farmer, and then build up your herd and build up your equity, and eventually take on a whole farm tenancy yourself. Yeah, those opportunities are starting to happen a little bit in this country, but it's not easy. You've got to be very, very committed to do it.
So other than cows, climate change, attracting people into the industry, what are other subjects that you think are going to be big talking points going forward within agriculture?
Gosh, well, those are three big things.
Absolutely. Tell us
Those
what's
are
on the
three big
horizon,
things.
Owen. What can you see?
What's on the horizon? I mean, I'm fairly optimistic. I think that farming is becoming more of a choice now than it would have been when I first qualified as a vet in 1994. Like I say, there are greater opportunities. I really am loving the fact that a lot of vets and dairy farmers are really embracing the regenerative agriculture scene, and just learning more about the importance of farming with nature. I'm loving that. And that, I think, is going to grow and grow and grow. And maybe that's the thing that will change people's attitudes, Rebecca. I think if we in the industry, in the agriculture industry, can just bring people who aren't in the industry along with us on those journeys of understanding more about farming with nature, then I think that we will see a big shift in people's
Because the
attitudes.
younger generation are more aware of, nature and things like that,
Yeah,
aren't they?
yeah, and that's all. I think that's what keeps me optimistic. Seeing the attitudes of my 3 children, like I say, are late teenagers and early 20s, and the importance that they place on the environment, and their willingness to understand a little bit more about the truth rather than just
What
taking
they
for
hear.
read what they're picking up from advertising.
Oh, fantastic. Well, what a great discussion, Owen, that has been. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks, Rebecca. It's been a
I've learned
pleasure.
a lot. I was very interested, in terms of the methane, understanding that, it does go through a cycle. It doesn't just stay there. Thank you everyone for watching. Next Monday at 10 a.m, I'll be joined by John Giles, who's a director of Promar UK, and we'll be talking about the current state and nature of the UK agri-food market. So that should be a good one. If you've got an interesting topic in agriculture that you would like to talk about, please get in contact with me via Agricultural Recruitment Specialist, which is www.agrirs.com. Owen, would you like to say goodbye?
Yes, goodbye everyone. It's been a pleasure this morning to speak to you, Rebecca, and thank you for the invitation.
Thanks so much, Owen. Goodbye from us.